Hello students, today we will study about the end of bipolarity. So in this unit we will understand about the Soviet system and its administrative mechanism and how this Soviet system disintegrated, what was the role of Gorbachev in the disintegration of the USSR, and after the disintegration what are the new issues and challenges emerged for the European countries, and what are the crises that emerge in post communist countries. So these things we are going to study in today's class. So let's begin with this topic of Cold War. In earlier classes we studied about the Cold War, how it started, what are the motive of this Cold War. Now we will study about its disintegration. So as you all know how it's created a two block and how this led to a lot of differences and a lot of proxy wars between the countries. Now we will study what is the Soviet system. So this Soviet system, we can say the Soviet system came from 1970s Russian Revolution, because that Russian Revolution emerged a socialist model of government where single party control, or we can say a single government control over economy, over society, over everything. That Russian Revolution talks about the state control, and this became one of the major reason for its disintegration later on. After the Second World War, Eastern European countries came under the control of socialist bloc, or we can say Russian control. So this led to creation of the United Sovereign Socialist Republic. So this USSR came from this region after the Second World War. And even though after the Second World War, these Eastern European countries' economy was emerging a lot, because they process a lot of oil, and a lot of iron steel production was under their control. So economy of these Eastern European countries was emerging, but gradually later on these things were started changing, and Western technology was far ahead compared to the Eastern technology, or we can say Eastern European countries. So a lot of crises were also started, like Afghanistan crisis. So all these things later on weakened the Soviet Union, and a lot of shortage was also started. So that's how this Soviet Union system, that was started from 1917 revolution after the Second World War, becoming more firm, later going towards its disintegration. So this is what about Soviet system, where state control everything, and that control nature of Soviet system later became one of the reason for its disintegration. Now let's come to the next slide. What was the role of Gorbachev in the disintegration of USSR? So he became, we can say, one of the foremost reason for the disintegration of USSR. Mikhail Gorbachev, who had become a general secretary of the Communist Party of Soviet Union in 1985. So as he's saying, there was a lot of economic issues, so he tried to brought some reform in the USSR system. So he started main 3 points of his reform called Perestroika, Glasnost, and a new thinking. What is Perestroika? Which means an economic restructuring, because earlier, as a Soviet system, everything was controlled by state. So he started a lot of economic restriction and started giving some sort of freedom, or some sort of little liberty to the people in the Eastern European countries. And the second one is Glasnost. What does it mean? It started creating openness and transparency in the government process, because Eastern European countries also dealing with the corruption. There was a high level of corruption was there, and a lot of intransparency was there. It's also creating an issue for the commoners in the Eastern European countries. So these two policy, and even he granted some sort of freedom to the press, or allowed people to criticize about this government. So a lot of new thinking was started emerging with this restructuring policy. He started this perestroika and glasnost policy to safeguard the Soviet Union economic structure or political structure. But these political reform, or we can say economic reform, leads to became one of the reason for the disintegration of USSR. How it's happened? It's happened because when these reforms were granted, so people get in a lot of chance, a lot of new idea was emerged, people started thinking and writing openly about the government. So that's led to a new agitation and a new thinking in the people against the state also. And one of the very renowned, no, Boris Yeltsin, one of the leader, was emerged in this situation and started a coup. And later on, when this new thinking was started, some of the states like Ukraine, Belarus declared itself outside the Soviet Union and disbanded it. So it became Ukraine and Belarus became a sovereign republic country. So this led to the one of the reason for the disintegration of USSR. And a new format emerged out of it, that was called new formation of Commonwealth of Independent State. So whatever the state of Eastern Europe that came out of the this USSR, they became one body called new formation of Commonwealth of Independent State. And later on this led to Russia became a new successor state of Soviet Union, and this that's how it's led a death and purification of old Soviet Union system. So that's why we say that the Gorbachev policy was one of the foremost reason for the disintegration of USSR. And other thing was also not, we cannot say that he was the only reason, but he was the one of the very strong reason for the disintegration of USSR. His policy created a freedom in people's mind, and people started criticizing government openly, or they were not satisfied with this government policy. So that's how these things was emerged at that time. Now let's come to the next slide. Why did Soviet Union disintegrated? Again the same thing. First is economic stagnation. What does it mean? Because the Soviet economy as a Soviet structure had a belief in firm state control on everything. So everything controlled by state, welfare were done by the state. There was no much private role. There was no much individual business enterprises at that time. So that's how Soviet Union not able to match with the Western countries or Western technical advancement. This created a sort of economic stagnation in the productivity. A lot of other reasons were also for this, because most of the most of the money, or we can say most of the resources, was consumed for the arm arsenals production, military spending, because also US and USSR also had a arm race at that time. So this also one of the reason for the economic stagnation, because no much money or no much resources was used for the economic growth of the country. So this was one other reason for the economic stagnation. And people, and it's also failed to meet the people's demand also. A huge war burden, resources use, all these things became a reason. Administrative default also, we can say the corruption and bureaucratic privilege also contributed in the economic stagnation. So these things was started and led to the disintegration of. And I earlier mentioned also Gorbachev reforms, and it was in the political reforms we can understand. And when the Gorbachev started these reforms, though these reforms were too conservative for someone who want more freedom in the USSR state model, and it all, on the other hand, it also became very conservative, and it's also become very liberal for someone who had faith in Soviet Union system. So mm, that's how Gorbachev lost the support of both these two groups. So this political instability also led to one of the reason for the reform, or one of the reason for disintegration. And the third one is the rise of nationalism. What does it mean? Because nationalism was started in a lot of Soviet Union state in Eastern Europe, and again, reform of Gorbachev was also one of the reason for rise of nationalism, because now people had a voice. People started talking about their national issues or their ethnic rights, or their religious identity. So these things also led to some sort of nationalism rising after that time period. So a lot of Central Asian republic like ethnic religious diversities also played a major role for the disintegration of Soviet Union. So this is how these things became economic stagnation, one thing, nation rise of nationalism, other, and this political reform. These three things somehow led to the disintegration of Soviet Union. I hope you understand whatever I am telling you. Now let's come to the next slide. What are the consequences of disintegration of USSR? So the first and foremost is what happened. It in the Cold War, because after Soviet Union collapsed, only Russia remained as a country, and all the satellite states of USSR now became a separate country or separate state. So this led to the end of Cold War, and now this also led to the end of bipolar state order, because now one hand we had USSR, another hand we had USA. So this led to the disintegration of USSR. So there was no bipolar state or bipolar order remain in country, and one of the reason that it also led to one new thing that called multipolar world. So that's how also a new multipolar world started. A lot of new country emerging like India China emergence led to the multipolar world also. Even Yugoslavia, Czechoslovakia, a lot of new state in Middle East also, these are states are emerging. Even though there are a lot of disintegration happen in eastern countries later on, but this changed into a multipolar world, we can say, to some extent. So this is how a global balance that was created now changed dynamically. So these are the new thing were started. And it also say that the US became a sole power after that. In next unit or in next chapter we will study about the hegemony of USA. Now USSR not remain that much powerful. Even we can say its image of, or we can say a powerful image of USSR was also damaged with these, with this disintegration. So now USA only remain the superpower, and it's also trying to dominate the whole world. In the we will study in next series how US tried to dominate the world. And other thing was started after that. It's led to a capitalism dominant economy in the world, because now whole world seeing the socialist fault, how socialist economy not very sustainable in the long run. So it's also leads to a dominancy of capitalist economy. So these are the things that we see very firstly after the end of the world war. Now next thing that happened was that political instability. What does it means? Political instability, this means after the disintegration of USSR, a lot of satellite state of USSR was emerged, and these states, a lot of ethnicity or a lot of religious issues was emerging. So it's also created an instability also. And in during this political instability, USA tried to dominate these relation or this state. So these are also one of the reason was started after that. A lot of territorial dispute were started. We will study in further what these things were started. So these are the issue was started. A lot of institution like IMF, World Bank become a powerful advisor of the country. And these world organization, or let's say if we talk about World Bank or IMF, some of these organization also call that they are the weapons of the USA, because USA also try to dominate these important international organization also. So these two are the direct consequences of disintegration. And the next thing that happened after that is economic challenge. What does it means? So a lot of economic challenge was also started after that, because the former republic faced a lot of economic challenges. How we say? Because now they tried to, what they tried to do, they tried to replace the state control economy or socialist economy with the capitalist economy. So it's also created a challenge, a lot of unemployment, hyperinflation, a lot of new things, because it was a sudden transition from the socialist economy to a capitalist economy. So it's state and the people not able to digest and not able to, they had no past experience of these things, so it's also created a lot of issue. So it's taken a very long time for the Eastern European countries to to be on the forefront, or to be to be go towards the development of the country. So a lot of new struggle was started in the Eastern European countries also, and to some extent USA tried to help with this country. We will study in the next slide what are the next thing was done for these economic disadvantages. So these are the main political we can say consequences of disintegration of USSR. Like what led to the, firstly it's in the war, second a lot of instability started, and a lot of economic challenge, because you can very easily you can understand that if some of the region continuously indulge into war, when the war will end, a lot of economic challenge going to be happen in any state. So these are the most thing that happened after the disintegration. What the next thing that happened? A shock therapy in post-communist regime. What does it mean? A shock therapy, what does it mean? Shock therapy means after the transition from authoritarian to democratic capitalist government. This is the model of transition mostly in Central Asia and Eastern European countries. So a lot of so these countries influenced by the World Bank or IMF for their economic restructuring. So this called a shock therapy. The whole thing is called as a shock therapy. And this shift to the capitalist economy, like private ownership, collective firm to the private ownership was started, and start from control socialist economy to the capitalist economy. So all these things were started with the influence of these international organization in, and these international organization also tried to restructure the economy of these newly Eastern European countries. And we can say IMF became one of the and foreign directive investment FDI, because now it's giving a lot of loans to these for the restructuring of the economy. It's tried to stabilize the economy of the country, reducing the inflation, providing employments to the people. So these are the agenda for of this international economic organization, like IMF, World Bank, or all other organization. So this is about the shock therapy in the post communist regime. I hope you understand this thing. And this is the map of the area about that influenced by the USSR, Russia, Kazakhstan. We will study in further what happened in Kazakhstan, how it impacted by the disintegration. Now next thing is, what are the consequences of the shock therapy in 1990s? So what is the consequences of shock therapy? So this shock therapy was as a started as a very goody thing, that is it will change the economy, it will restructure the economy, it will assure employment to the people, and etc etc. But its consequences was not so good, because economic instability remains the same, and it's not led to the people benefit. And whatever the dreams that they've seen, that economy will transform like the Western European country, but nothing happened at that such extent. So this was the one of the issue, that economic stability remains, and it also led to the a lot of political unrest, social unrest also, because state control things try to be sold. And it's also generally ruined the economy, because in form of restructuring they try to totally erase the earlier economic structure. Because in Russia, a large industry was earlier controlled by the state, but now this large industry, 90% of them were sold to the private. So this led to the virtual disappearance of the industries also, and it's also called as the largest garbage sale in the history. So these are the codes that used for this industry at that time. A lot of depreciation was also seen in the economy also, because ruble, the Russian currency, depreciated very largely. That's led to the hyperinflation. It's a lot of disappearance of industry was started, because these industry were a source of employment. If these industry were ruined, the how people will sustain, for a long run. So these are the things that started collective farming, because it was a socialist state. So collective farming was used by the people. So this collective farming now disintegrated totally. So these things are also led to a lot of food crisis in the state also, because now people do not have enough food to consume. So this also raise a lot of issue. Now food import were increased, so this impacted the GDP and trade balance of this country. A real GDP, gross domestic product of Russia, decreased a lot. So these are the change that happened, and led to a lot of economic crisis, a lot of instability in the state. And one other thing, just that socialist state believe in welfare policy. So this welfare system was totally destroyed. Withdrawal of the subsidy on which people depend thoroughly, and it's pushed people towards the poverty at that time. And a lot of privatization was happened too. So this privatization in Russia created a disparity between the rich and poor. A lot of mafias were emerged at that time. So these are the things led to a lot of issues in the economic structure of the country, and it's totally affected the commoners of the Eastern European countries or in Russia. So this was one of the very foremost consequences of shock therapy in 1990s. And the second thing is corruption and inequality. What does it mean? I earlier told also, okay, the economic structure transformed the society into two parts. One is very rich and one is very poor, because now there was no socialist welfare model in the state remains. So this also led a second issue in these things were sold. And corruption, how corruption was there, because there was no much transparency remain. Capitalists controlled everything. Bureaucracy had a high hand over others. So mafias were emerged at that time. So this also led a lot of instability or a lot of issue in the society. And the third thing is social unrest. The economic hardship and the social inequality caused by the shock therapy led to the social unrest also. This social unrest also seen in form of protest, strikes, or even violence also. Even where in a hasty we tried to transform the Eastern European states, some had set up the democratic model in very hurry, like president ship was imposed in Turkmenistan or Uzbekistan. But these president who were elected turned into authoritarian government also, because they lived on their post for 10 years. So these things also affected the democratic model of the country also. So this also created a lot of political unrest, and sometimes it's led to the civil war also. So these all are the reasons that led to the a lot of issues in the 1990s, or we can say after the disintegration. What are these are the things that Eastern European countries faced. Even we say that. Now let's come to the next slide, that is tension and conflicts, because we say these conflicts and these tension remain with these countries. And the first is Chechnya and Dagestan. This was one of the secessionist movement was started there, because Chechnya have a ethnic identity of their own. So a lot of secessionist movement was started against the state. So Russia was indulged in that matter also. Later on, it solved very harshly. So this was the first issue that was started at that time. And the second one is Tajikistan civil war that was happened in 2001. This authoritarian government led to the civil war also, because this authoritarian government not working with the democratic model or not working with the democratic rights. So these things also led to the civil war in states also. And the third issue of Azerbaijan provinces. What is the issue of Azerbaijan? Azerbaijan has an issue of territorial dispute between the Nagorno and Karabakh region, because there was difference between the Christians and the Muslim for the territorial gain. So this issue was also affected and influenced and created a tension in the region. And the third and the fourth thing was happened is war in Afghanistan and Iraq that happened in 2001. So this was also an issue that's created a conflict, and USA was also involved in it and tried to dominate the Afghanistan area. So this was also an issue that started at that time. Even other Eastern European country that earlier called the satellite state of USSR, like Czechoslovakia, a lot of state that this led to the conflict in Czechoslovakia and Yugoslavia. Like Czechoslovakia was disintegrated in Czechos and Slovakia, one of the reason, and later on Yugoslavia has an ethnic civil war also. So there is a lot of tension and a lot of issue in the Eastern European countries. Even today, we read in newspaper and we see this issue of conflict of region between Nagorno Karabakh region. So this issue still remain unsolved. So that issue that started from after the disintegration of Cold War, disintegration of Soviet Union, is still dealing with it. So we still deal with some of these issue, even though after a lot of years there's a lot of issue that still remains the same. So these ethnicity and these ethnic conflicts and religious differences or territorial disputes created a lot of tension and conflicts in the Eastern European country, or even directly or indirectly the whole world was involved in that, and it's also shaping the politics in world platform also. So these are the major issues that led to the after that led after the disintegration of USSR. And now we will study what is the India and post communist country. So India had very good relation with Russia. India tried to maintain good relation with Russia, even with the post communist countries. Even after the disintegration, a lot of Eastern European country, India had a separate friendship treaty and bilateral relation with the Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, and even the other countries also. So we had, and we even today we share a very good relation with the Eastern European countries, and a very good ties between them. And India and Russia a very good relation, even earlier period also. In also even today in 2022 we had a 20 billion trade volume. So it also reflects how India and Russia had a good relation, because for an arm and military equipment we for most we really based, or we are very rely on Russia. And we have a very long strategic partnership also in defense agreement or in technology, or for very importantly Russia is very important for India's nuclear program. So a lot of sharing between India and Russia used to happen earlier also and today also. So these are the things that happen. And you can see that more than 80 plus bilateral agreement was signed between India and Russia. So it also reflects how India and Russia had a very strong bond, and even have very strong bond. And the Indo Russia strategic agreement was signed between India and Russia in 2001. And India Russia also has signed a friendship agreement with each other. So these things reflects that how India and Russia had a very good relation with each other. So this is all in this topic, that how what is Soviet Union and how the structure of Soviet Union not able to sustain, and how the lot of Eastern European countries became an independent state. A new formation of Commonwealth of independent state was formed, and Russia only remained as a successor state of USSR. and how the economic crisis shock therapy happened, and how this shock therapy not able to fulfill the demands of the people, and what are the consequences of it, what are the conflicts in territory started. In further classes we will study, uh, after this end of bipolarity, we will study the US hegemony, how US became a dominant after the end of this war. So these all the things we need to study, and we are done with this topic. And these are the MCQ I have framed, so you need to solve this question and practice this question, so you will able to understand what is going to be asked. You get an idea about how question going to be framed in the examination. So I hope you understood all these things. This is all from my side, and in next class we will study about the US hegemony and how US dominate the politics.